Hello, online ag economics students. This week we are going to look at the first half of chapter 9. Next week we'll look at the second half of chapter 9. There's quite a few concepts in this chapter, and I just wanted to break this chapter in half for you. Also, we have your second exam that you'll be taking next week, so I didn't want to completely overwhelm you with exam as well as the full chapter, especially since it's an extra long one. So we're going to look at these key terms throughout this chapter. We're going to review perfect competition, look at what imperfect competition is, and find the equilibrium of various types of imperfect competition. We're going to then look at the different types of imperfect competition, which are monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly. So first we are going to review the concept of perfect competition. We did talk about this several chapters ago, and then they brought it up again in the last chapter, chapter 8. So conditions for perfect competition. The first is that there are a large number of sellers producing a similar, same homogeneous product, and there are a large number of buyers purchasing that product. An example of that is milk. For the most part, milk is milk is milk is milk is milk, regardless of whether it's Great Value brand, whether it's Prairie Farms brand, whether it is Dean's. The product in itself is a homogeneous product. It's the same product. A second condition for perfect competition is that no single buyer or seller has a disproportionate influence on price. What this means is that price is determined strictly by supply and demand. So we have seen the supply and demand curves in the last chapter, and our equilibrium was at the intersection of the supply and demand curve. And that was what determined the price. So the intersection of supply and demand determines the price in perfect competition. We'll see later that price is not determined in that same way for imperfect competition. Another signifier for perfect competition is that sufficient information is available to all participants regarding prices, quantities, quality, sources of supply, etc. So there is no hidden knowledge anywhere. Anybody can go ahead and look at what the market price for milk is, what the market price for corn is online, or hear it on the radio. There's lots of information, public information available for research that has been done. So the best way to produce milk, grow crops, things like that. There's not a lot that is hidden when speaking about some of those products that exist in a perfectly competitive market. Finally, in a perfectly competitive market, there are no barriers to entry or exit, meaning that there's not a high capital cost and there's not much advantage to economies of scale for big producers. So big producers aren't going to get really cheap prices on things. Maybe an example of this would be like a hot dog stand, just standard hot dogs with bread and ketchup and mustard. To enter the market of a hot dog stand would not cost very much money. So that means there's not very much barriers to entry. And then there's no legal fees or fines to leave the market. You could just shut down your hot dog stand and leave, and that would be that's just an example of perfectly competitive. So those are the types of markets we've been talking about up to this point, is perfect competition. We're going to switch gears and talk about imperfect competition. So imperfect competition exists when the price of a product is not solely determined by supply and demand. So no longer is that equilibrium point relevant in determining the price. Buyers and sellers have the ability to exert some control or some power over the price, and we'll see how that works out in some graphs here in a bit. But first, we're going to summarize the three different types of imperfect competition. The first is monopolistic. The second is oligopoly, and the third is monopoly. So it's very odd that monopolistic and monopoly sound so similar when they are very, very different. So it might be easy to get these two words confused. We're going to try to work through it and not get them confused, but monopolistic and monopoly are very different, and it's actually really silly that their names are the same. So first we're going to talk about monopolistic. So monopolistic products have many similarities of a perfectly competitive market, but products are somehow differentiated. So they are not exactly the same. Now, the products may actually be very similar. In fact, the products may actually be the same, but the companies may have differentiated themselves through branding and advertising, or it is possible that the product has been slightly modified. So every time you go to the grocery store, you see Dean's milk is more expensive than the store brand milk. If we're talking Walmart, we're talking Great Value. Or Prairie Farms milk is more expensive than Great Value milk. Again, I said before, milk is milk is milk is milk is milk, and these actually are two homogeneous products, but some people are paying for the label or the advertising or the feel-goodness that comes along with buying name brand milk. So Dean's and Prairie Farms has successfully branded or advertised their product to set it apart from the product itself. So monopolistic is the products are very, very, very similar, but somehow the businesses have differentiated themselves. It might be through advertising, or they may have added some small change to the product. Oligopoly is an example of imperfect competition because there are a few sellers in the market. So think of all of those companies out there that do the same thing, sell the same thing, or same type of thing, but there's only a few big names out there, and there are lots of buyers. So a couple examples we have here are ag chemical companies. In our area, there's a few big names. There's Stevenson Service Company, which is FS, AgTech, CPS, Pearl City Elevator. There's a few places that buyers can purchase those supplies, the fertilizer, etc. Another example is airlines. We have a limited number of airlines that we can choose from. We can choose from American Airlines, we can choose from Southwest, and we can choose from about 5 or 6 more. There are not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of airlines out there that have planes that we can purchase a plane ticket from. Another example from the ag world is ag machinery brands. I only put John Deere and Case IH on here, but we know that there are others as well, New Holland and so on. But still, there's just a few big names. So how these businesses differentiate their product is through their customer service, maybe their maintenance or technical support, potential delivery options, timeliness, etc. Other characteristics of an oligopoly is that there's high barriers to entry. Not anyone can just start up a chemical company. Not anyone can just start up an airline. Not anyone can just start up an ag equipment place because there is huge capital costs that go into that. Generally, when we talk about the price of businesses that exist within an oligopoly, we talk about the price remaining pretty stable over time, because if one company increases their price the buyers are going to go to the other company. And if the company decreases their price, eventually the 2 or 3 companies that are competing against each other will go into a price war where they drop their price, and eventually neither company is making any money. So really, you don't see companies raising or lowering their price too much in an oligopoly market. Now, how do companies prevent? So let's try to do an example here. So let's say that a John Deere combine is, let's say brand new combine is $500,000. Let's say a Case IH is $500,000. If John Deere lowers their price to $450, then Case IH, in order to sell, would maybe lower theirs to $430, and then they would lower theirs to $420. Eventually, like I said, it would get in a price war, and eventually neither company is going to make any money. So there's a certain profit margin that both these companies have to make. If by chance these 2 companies call each other up and say, and Case IH calls up John Deere and says, hey, what are you going to charge for your 2018 combine that you're putting out this year? And they say, we're going to charge $500,000, and why don't you do the same so that we can maximize our profits? This is illegal for them to talk about their pricing. It's called price fixing. And it's really hard to tell if that happens. Same thing can happen on a local level. Any of these ag companies could call each other up and ask what they're going to charge for nitrogen, for ammonia, putting on the fields this year. Now they could drop their price to try to beat the other person, but eventually they'll get into a price war and they won't make any profit. So 2 companies could agree to stay in the same price range so that they maximize their profits. But again, this all leads back to the fact that within an oligopoly, the price is likely to remain stable over time. Okay, the final type of a imperfect, a situation where competition is imperfect, is that of a monopoly. This is where there's one individual seller in the market, really high barriers to entry, and an example of this is electric companies. I know I have one choice to purchase my electric, and that is from ComEd, and I'm assuming that many of you have that as well. Really high barriers to entry because of, again, cost of, you can't just start an electric company. That's super expensive and not practical. Okay, the whole goal of these next couple of slides is going to be to figure out what price and what quantity will be produced and will be charged under the different types of imperfect markets. So I'm going to write that down just so we know why we're talking about some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. Okay, so we are going to discover the price and quantity for imperfect markets. Before, when we discovered the price and quantity for perfect markets, we looked at the supply curve and the demand curve. We found the equilibrium point, which was the point where they both intersected, and we followed the price horizontally to figure out what the price was. We followed that equilibrium point vertically to figure out what the quantity was, and then that was it. So wherever Q fell and wherever P fell, those were our equilibrium prices and quantities. This is different. now that we're looking at imperfect markets, because the shape of our demand curve, the shape of our marginal revenue curve, and all of those things are different. So I'm going to explain some of the differences. First of all, we're looking at a profit maximization graph of a perfect competition. The two main differences are that under perfect competition, marginal revenue is constant. So the price is not changing because price is always where supply and demand is equal. So the marginal revenue that the company is receiving every single time they sell another product is the same. So this marginal revenue here was $45 because every unit that the company sold, they were receiving an additional $45. Also, with perfect competition, we were dealing with perfectly elastic goods, and so the demand curve was elastic, which means that that's going to be different than what we're dealing with for the imperfect competition curve. So let's look at those and we'll look at the differences here. So the imperfect competition marginal revenue is on a downward slant. It is not horizontal as it was in the last slide. This is because there is the amount that the producers are receiving for each additional good is actually decreasing. We're not going to go into all of the whys and the hows, because if you want to know a little bit more information about that, you can look at your textbook, but they don't actually explain it super well. But what I need you to know is that the marginal revenue curve for imperfect competition is not horizontal, it is slanting, okay? So it slants downward, and that's going to have an effect on our production level for quantity and the price that we charge. So we're going to take a look at an example. And this is actually an example out of your textbook. It's number 1, and that's part of what's assigned for you for this week. So what we can do, or what we can figure out here, is the short run equilibrium price and quantity. So under both a monopolistic and a monopoly market, producers will supply at the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This point, this output, this Q will maximize their profits. Okay, so let's first find the point on this graph where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So it doesn't look like this, but marginal revenue is actually this slanted line here. Okay, so that's marginal revenue. Here's our marginal cost curve. Marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect right there. That is at Q equals 20. So the quantity that would be being produced at this point is 20 units. Now, producers will price their product where the quantity aligns with the market demand curve. So we are not going to price our product at $13 because we can get more, because our market, if we have a quantity of 20, they are willing to pay $20 for each of those 20 units. So I followed this up to the demand curve. So this red line here is the demand curve. After I found my Q, I followed that up to the demand curve. And then where the Q hits the demand curve, and you go horizontally across, this is the amount that they're going to charge. So the amount that they are going to charge is different than where marginal cost intersects with marginal revenue. Okay, I'm going to erase this quick, and actually I'm going to go through the questions exactly in the book for number 1. Let me turn to that page quick. Okay, so letter A says, what price is charged by the monopolist in order to maximize profits? So we already figured out that we are going to produce where MC equals MR, so we're going to produce at 20. Then we're going to follow that up to the price that intersects the demand curve, which is over here at $20. So A, what price is charged by the monopolist in order to maximize profits? $20. Okay, B says calculate the total revenue accruing to the monopolist at the profit maximizing output. This is the profit maximizing output. So they are selling 20 units for $20, right? Here's our $20, here's our 20 units. So our total revenue that we are bringing in is 20 times 20, which is $400 for revenue. Calculate the total cost to the monopolist at the profit maximizing output. So cost at this output. So wherever this output intersects with the average total cost, so if we are producing 20 units, our average total cost is right there, because that's where 20 units intersects with the average total cost. So our average total cost is 15. So C says calculate the total cost to the monopolist at the profit maximizing output. So it costs for each unit, it costs $15 to produce, and we are producing 20 of them. So the total cost is going to be 15 times 20, which is $300. D, calculate the profit for the monopolist. Well, profit equals revenue minus total cost. So 400 minus 300 is 100. And that's what this area is here. The difference between 20 and 15 is $5. And then we're selling 20 of them too. So 20 times 5 is 100. So we can double check it both ways. E says calculate the total variable cost and fixed costs of the monopolist at the profit maximizing output. Okay, I'm going to erase some of this. Okay, total variable costs and total fixed costs at profit maximizing output. Okay, we already know that our profit maximizing output is 20. And our average variable costs intersect right here. So our average variable cost is 12. And again, we're producing 20 units. So 12 times 20 is $240. So that would be our total variable. So total variable equals 240, and then total fixed. Well, we see our fixed costs. Okay, well, there's not a fixed cost curve here, but there is a total cost curve. And we know our total costs are $15. And if our total costs are 15, average total costs are 15, average variable costs are 12. So we know that variable cost plus fixed costs equals 15. So variable cost is 12 plus X equals 15, and then that's a difference of 3. So our average fixed cost is 3, the difference here, times our 20 units. So our average fixed cost is $60, which makes sense because our total costs are $300. Okay, F, now assume the marginal cost curve represents market supply for a perfectly competitive market. What would the equilibrium price and quantity be for perfect competition? So let's erase all this again to get us some space here. Okay, so they're saying imagine that the marginal cost curve is the supply curve, right? And if we remember the point of the marginal, or so this is the supply curve, and we have our demand curve. So the point where the demand curve meets the supply curve, this would be normally where we would be supplying. We would normally be supplying at an output of 28, and we would be charging a price of about $15.75, it looks like. So the question is, what would the equilibrium price and quantity be for perfect competition? Q would be 28, and price would be approximately $15.75. The last question, are consumers better off or worse off with perfect competition or monopoly? We are going to get into that next week. So you can skip that portion of the question for this week, and we will look at that next week. The example that we just completed was equilibrium in the short run, and this example here is equilibrium in the long run. So in the long run, equilibrium will ultimately be at a point where the average total cost curve is tangent to the demand curve at the same quantity point where marginal costs equals marginal revenue. So Q is equal here at the same point where average total cost is tangent to demand. Why this is true is because at equilibrium, at long-term equilibrium, there would be no profit and there would be no loss, because let's just say Q is 20 here, and let's do Q is our price is $30 here. So the price that we are receiving it for the 20 units that we're producing is $30 a piece. So 30 times 20 is 600. So revenue is $600, but our cost of production is also $30 per unit. So our revenue is 600 and our cost is 600. So we have zero profit and we also have zero loss. So there's really, at this point, there's going to be no incentive for anybody to enter the market because the people who are in the market are not making money. And there's not going to be too much incentive for people to exit the market because the people in the market are not losing money. They're paying all their bills, they're paying all their labor. They're just not increasing their profits. So this would be an example of what the graph would look like in the long run for imperfect competition in a monopoly or a monopolistic market. Okay, this is the final slide for this week, and what we have here is just a summary of the different characteristics of all of the types of markets. So perfect competition, and then again, all of these over here are imperfect. So every single one of these is imperfect. We have monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly. And you can just see the differences between the number of buyers and sellers, whether or not they differentiate their product, how easy it is to enter and exit, how the price and quantity is determined in each of them. We did not go over oligopoly price and we're not going to. How oligopolies determine their prices is pretty complex, and oftentimes it's illegal how they price their products because they do. It is illegal, but they do price fix. They talk to each other and see how much they're going to charge. And ability to set the market price. You can see how much power each of the businesses in each of those markets have. And then this should say, not say economics, this should say long run profits possible. So ultimately, in the long run, you would not be able to make profits in perfect competition or in monopolistic competition, or monopolistic, sorry, but you would in the latter two. And then I just give you examples down here of the different types of businesses that fall into those categories. So that is it for the lecture for this week. I think I'm going to open up the test for you this week. So you'll have 2 weeks to complete the test, and then you'll have a couple book questions this week and a couple book questions next week. And then I also divided the quiz in half. So multiple choice, there's like 10 questions this week and maybe 8 questions next week. So good luck on the exam and good luck on the quizzes. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.